Thanks for including me. It's hard to say. I was lucky enough to grow up in a household that had cameras. My mother always had a home video, like a camcorder. And she was always filming our lives and recording moments in our life and our childhood that she'd either keep for us or send to our grannies. And my father had a camera. So it just felt like I grew up with the notion that all these moments, they mattered. And so really that mindset, I think, was quite ingrained since I was a child. I think I only realized that after university. I had studied history of art, which I loved. It taught me a lot about using art as a language and understanding the world and cultures and people through art. But having studied that, I was daunted by the idea of a life through research and academia, and it felt too removed from the world to me, and I wanted to participate, I wanted to do something. And so I realized that photography was the hobby that wasn't really going away anytime soon. It was still there. And I just decided to lean into it and to pursue it. So I moved to Cape Town and I retrained. That's impossible to say. I feel like the story is only just beginning. Yes and no. I think that AI has amplified a debate that's been raging since the dawn of photography. What is real, what is true, what's in the frame, what's not, inclusion or omission. You know, from analog to digital, with Photoshop and social media, I feel like photography and reality have always been ships passing in the night. I think authenticity lies within the connection, whether it's a connection between photographer and their subject matter, or even the subject matter and the audience. And I think we often forget the role of the viewer when considering art and authenticity. And as much as we don't make art for other people, I think it thrives when it does connect with people and people connect with it. So the story behind Firewood is that I was working on a project in Botswana, where I'm from, where I grew up. And I was in the eastern side of the Okavango Delta. And at that time I was driving between villages and had a carload of people strangers, I didn't know them, I was just lifting them between spaces. And there was a family in the back, there were a couple of individuals in the back seat, and even a man in the passenger seat with his elephant rifle. And so we were quite an eclectic crew. Going along the dirt road in big open stretches of bushveld, we came across this tree, alive with flames, and there was nobody around apart from us. And there it was, just burning away. The fire hadn't spread. So I stopped and everybody waited patiently while I took some photographs. We watched it for a while. They didn't seem to have any idea why it might be on fire either. And so we went on our way. In the moment of taking that photograph, it said so much to me about life in Botswana, as I've known it, in that you're never quite sure what you're going to come across in any part of the country, and anything you might come across really isn't that bizarre. You know, the mundane is bizarre and the bizarre is mundane. But what it means to me now really is much more about the state of the world, that so much of it is on fire and that nobody's really taking any notice. I haven't, and I'm embarrassed to say that. I'm just not a crier. I think the hardest story I've ever had to capture would be, it actually was a campaign, a commercial shoot for a brand that was supporting survivors of domestic abuse. And it was beautifully done. And it was difficult and it was meaningful and it was quite beautiful. And it was difficult for a lot of reasons, not only because of the subject matter, but also the conditions. Commercial shoots are what they are. And what it meant in that space was that being precious with their time that they'd gifted also came with other challenges. In that space, it meant that while the video and TV commercial crew were filming their interviews, we were photographing the stills within the same stage. What it meant was that when those women came to my set, they were hearing their own words said through another actor as an overlay. and that we had to shoot very, very quietly so as not to interrupt their sound. So for me, that was incredibly difficult because I was wanting to, as much as possible, hold these women so carefully in the trust that they had given us. And to have to do that silently was both difficult and beautiful because we communicated non-verbally in a way, for me to direct them how they should be, how they should sit. But also the positive of that was that how that affected them, hearing their words at the same time. They had written pieces to share and photographing them at the same time that they were reliving some of their own experiences and words also added a really, really emotional dynamic. That was just difficult to navigate, and it was difficult to see them relive that and also just get insight into what they had experienced. Of course it can, and of course it has. And it's hard to say exactly when those moments are, but I think all art has the ability to change our hearts and to move us in ways. And I think that's always happening. There may be defining moments within that, but the art that we view and consume is always adding to us and changing us. I think that question takes me back to being a history of art student, where everything in an image tells a story. And so much of that stays with me as a photographer, in that even particularly in a commercial space where you can manipulate everything and you have a choice in everything that you put in the frame, makes you question what all of that means and what it says to the viewer. What does this light communicate about this frame, about this person, about this setup? What does this object symbolize in today's world to particular cultures? Everything in the frame tells a story, and I think in photography, what is the challenge is that a single frame, you commit to it, compared to perhaps moving image. You commit to a single frame, and so it's a lot more exposed, if you'll excuse the pun, but the viewer can really examine everything in that frame. I think humans are just built to create stories, whether we're telling them or whether the viewer is making them up as they go, and they're telling themselves a story, they're imagining a story of what each of those things in a frame says. I would say they reveal more about me, and more specifically, my connection to what I'm photographing, not the subject itself. And I think there are many times in which photographs reveal a lot about the people viewing them. How they're received is not something that you can control as a photographer. And I think that says a lot about maybe a collective frame of mind, or even individually. That's a really difficult question because there are so many. There have been so many over the years. But that question is also Pandora's box. Once you let it have that effect on you, it can be quite difficult. And there have been so many times when, particularly because I work in so many remote regions, that pressure to have come away with certain things, because that chance may not come again, can be very difficult. But every time that happens, I try and use that as the process, the stepping stone to the next part of my journey as a photographer. It helps me realize it's never really about the photograph. It's about the insight and the angle and the perspective that you maybe didn't have that you now have. I think if it wasn't photography, I don't think there's any other visual medium that I would go to tell stories. I wouldn't go to painting or drawing or anything like that. I don't have those skills, but I think it would be words and writing more specifically. And it's a tool that I use a lot alongside my photography to articulate my own understanding of the world and my own photography.